the Mike J. Schaefer from Husker247 joining us now.
So, Shape, we were talking earlier, and I know Ravi's. I'm not going to ask your question so much as I'm going to ask around it with Shape.
Okay.
Mike J, how hard?
No, I've never caught a punt. Next question.
You guys. Okay. Safe. Stop. It doesn't help me.
It was pretty funny, though.
Yeah, I know.
That was a good one.
Mike J. Knock it off.
Sorry. Shane, do your job.
Just chuckling over there. Chucklehead. Shay, how hard is it right now with whatever all the variables are, where you can't just call kids anymore? There's like the middle people and the other middle people and the other middle. Like, how hard is it to recover recruiting right now? Like, shouldn't we be talking about that Ohio State's in town to see Braylon Warren or something? It's like, but you never know because you have to wait for the information to like come out from
all interested parties.
Yeah, it's just like, how hard is it, Shafe?
It's different. I mean, it's different certainly than when I first started. It's different than even just like 5 years ago. I think about somebody like John Talman, who was the best the Nebraska market's ever had in terms of covering recruiting. And I mean, he did it in an era where recruits didn't have cell phones, and he couldn't fall back on sending a DM if a kid didn't answer a message. And, you know, he would have to get house landline numbers and all of that. Like, it's just, so the recruiting industry has always undergone shifts and changes in terms of access to information and the best way to get the information, the best way to present the information. And now, you know, there's another shift in sort of how stuff gets disseminated, what stuff, you know, gets put out there, what people react to. And so, yeah, I mean, it's just it's a challenge. And then you throw in the transfer portal, which is unlike high school recruiting, where you have representatives that have their opinions on what's happening. And sometimes it's not even the same as if you do actually get a hold of a kid in the transfer portal. He may have an entirely different comment than what his representation may say. So it's a unique time to be covering recruiting, to say the very
least. Shafe, so let me ask you something, because I was telling Ravi this. I probably talked to you more than, well, for certainly anyone here locally that's in your industry about Marty and kind of this deal. I listened to you yesterday with talking about Cal and Miami and the differences and kind of your thoughts, and I thought it was kind of interesting. And I guess my question is kind of how do we discern, or where did we, like, what's kind of the backstory to this sentiment or the feel? Because it's real, and for some, that Nebraska was either late or not as interested, or it only picked up recently. Like, what's the difference between Nebraska doing their due diligence and guys having good information in your industry that Nebraska was kind of approaching this different than other schools?
Yeah, I mean, for me, some of it is comes from Brown himself. I mean, he talked with Michael Brunson, responded to messages with Michael Brunson, basically said, "I'm not hearing from Nebraska." I mean, so when he said that on Tuesday of last week, and that's 2 days before he's set to visit Nebraska, and I mean, it might have been Monday night, so I don't have the exact. So we'll say either Monday night or early Tuesday. And Tuesday he was in Miami, so I'm guessing it was Monday night. And you know that he's going to be in Miami the next day. And we've got a really good Miami site. I mean, they're plugged in. They know what's going on. And I'm talking with our Miami guy, and he's like, "Hey, Miami wants to close this down today." And, you know, Brown's telling us that he's not hearing from Nebraska. I'm hearing that Miami wants to finish this thing off when they've got him on campus, because they don't want him to go to Lincoln. They sure as hell don't want him to go to Cal or to Manhattan or wherever. They want him to be enamored by Miami. And so, you know, all of that kind of happens early last week. I think there's some uncertainty about if Nebraska was a visit or if it was a, "Hey, you know, we've got a practice. Why don't you just come down and watch the practice?" And so I think some of it was was a clear indication as to how Nebraska was established in this recruitment. We knew how Miami felt because they made him a priority. They told him he was a priority. He felt like he was a priority. We had an indication that Cal was the same because of how they were treating it. And Cal was in a situation where they had a decimated running back room. Part of the positioning or part of the viewpoint of Nebraska is that they did appear to be hanging back. He hadn't talked with BJ Barthel as of Monday of last week, or at least that's the intimation that he had given us. And so it's hard for me to view Nebraska, and maybe they're doing their due diligence in the background. I don't know. It's not like they're calling me up and telling me how this is going. They don't have to. But the point is, like, if you really want a guy, your running backs coach isn't going until Tuesday, 2 days before he's coming in for a practice or a visit or whatever it was. Like, he felt love from Miami. He felt love from Cal. The way he responded to Michael Bruntz last week was a guy who wasn't feeling love from Nebraska. I think that's where that comes from. And our reporting reflected that. And so, but then, you know, the visit happens on Thursday and everything shifts. And it sure feels like wherever Nebraska was, if this is a horse race, if Nebraska's far in the back, they sure as hell got neck and neck with Miami based on what happened on Thursday. Now, where Cal was in all of this and how Cal has emerged as the favorite at this point, that's all part of recruiting. And it's just to say that, you know, how things are presented one day versus where we get to the next. That's why we always say recruiting is fluid. And especially when we're talking about small time frames and the transfer portal, where just a couple conversations or one day at university has to be enough for a guy to decide what he wants to do for the next season of his career. And so these things can flip on a dime. And, you know, I think it's important for fans as we go forward. Like, the high school recruiting process is drawn out. It takes months and months, and in some cases, years. I mean, Nebraska recruited Jackson Cantwell for years, and then it was over, and they're not even involved anymore. And then we talk about transfer portal recruiting, and just go back to January and how many offensive linemen, or December, how many offensive linemen Nebraska was involved in. It's like, oh, it's looking good for this guy from New Mexico State. It's looking good from this guy from Washington State. They didn't get either of them because that's what transfer portal, like, it is fast-paced, speed dating recruiting, and things flip quickly. So however it looks on one particular day of the week until a kid is signed and locked in somewhere, lots of things can change. So the presentation of how Nebraska looked early last week flipped hard when we got to Thursday, and everything I heard from the people that I talked with, you know, it was a really, really good visit. Was it enough? We'll find out. And it certainly feels like this is a guy that has some pretty good options ahead of him and a tough decision to make.
Yeah, it was interesting. I called him, and I mean, I can share this with you because I talk to you enough anyway, and I trust you. But, you know, and I called him yesterday, and it was about something in particular. He initially said Coach Benning, which he almost never does. I mean, sometimes he does, but most times he doesn't. And I said, hey, you know, did I catch you at a bad time? And he said, hey, yeah, I'll call you back. I'm with the coaches from Cal. And I said, oh, they're there right now? And he said, yeah. And I said, oh, man, you know what? I appreciate you picking up, man. I'll let you go. I'll hit you back later. And I hung up the phone, Schaefer, and I was in shock that Cal was back again, right? They had done the first in-home. They were way ahead of the game. You know, Coach.
Well, that in-home happened, and I didn't know about it until I think you mentioned it to me. Yeah. I don't think that had been reported until then.
And you listen, and
like a lot happens in the cover of darkness in terms of portal recruiting that people just don't know.
And I didn't meet, like, that conversation took, I was just joking with Ravi. I said, you know, I ended up talking to Shay. I said the parking, it's like 50-some minutes. You know, we're just.
Yeah, we're on the phone a long time.
And the thing about it was, I'm like, how are they back again already? But then I went back to something Coach Rule said before this thing even came to light. He said the desperate teams will set the market. is that what you kind of see happening here in some of these situations where, because normally it wouldn't be like this if they didn't not have 5 running backs in the portal, or have a little bit more extra money to spend. Like, it's almost that I'm just like, dang, I hope that's not the case, because it's easy to get a lot of bad advice if that's the case.
Yeah, I mean, it's entirely possible, and I would remove the word desperate, because I think there's too much noise with that
Or
word.
or negative. Okay.
And I understand what Matt Rule means, but I would change it to like motivated, because go look at how Nebraska went after offensive linemen in December and January. Look at how Nebraska went after wide receivers in December and January. Look at how Nebraska has conducted themselves when they've gotten into the portal period, and they know, like, we've got to go get this. That's motivated. That's a team that's allocated its resources and its time and is set in a direction of which we need someone at this position, and we're working through our board, and we're not getting Isaiah World, and we're not getting Shiaz Pete, and we're now down to Elijah Pritchett, and we like Elijah Pritchett. But yeah, that was a motivated, I mean, I wouldn't call Nebraska desperate, but motivated with how they went after Elijah Pritchett and the resources it took to get Elijah Pritchett and Rocco Spindler. And that's what Cal is right now for running backs, because, I mean, you need running backs. And if you can get a quality guy who had a nice year at North Dakota State, who has upside and has years ahead of him, I mean, it makes a ton of sense to me that Brown would be a target for a team that doesn't know what its running back picture looks like, but knows it needs somebody, has a coach in Wilcox that's a tremendous evaluator. Look at how much talent is leaving Cal, and people want it.
Yeah, he's
like
a good coach.
They want it.
I loved him from day one.
He's a good coach in a bad situation. I would like to see him at a different program and how that would all look.
Just wait a year. You'll get your
We've been waiting a little while. I mean, it feels like he keeps skinning the cat a little bit on that one.
Well, now he's got the Rivera influence, so we'll see.
So, but yeah, I totally understand what Matt Rule means. I just would change the word desperate to motivated, which, call it spin if you want. But I think desperate, there's a little bit too much negativity around that, because I think some of it is like, hey, we need this. We have to invest our time and our resources and our money, and we have to take care of it. And that's where I think Cal is at the running back spot.
Schaefer, I'm curious. You mentioned how good the site, the 24/7 site, is for Miami. Has there been anything in the reporting that either they've shared with you or that you've heard that you feel is inaccurate from the general narrative? Because I guess what's out there about Miami is like, oh, they're offering the biggest bag, and like that's it, and that's the Miami pitch. I'm curious if there's more to it than that you're aware of.
In our conversations, I mean, NIL, I think Miami feels good about what it can offer, but I also think it wasn't. I mean, it wasn't going to be like an out of this world offer. I don't know. I mean, I don't spend a lot of time asking and talking about NIL because I can't verify the numbers. So anyone could give me a number, and
I wish other people had your discipline, because some people would just say anything.
Well, I mean, that's sort of where we're at. You can't verify it. You can't, like, I'm not going to get Miami's NIL operation on the phone, and they're like, you know what, Mr. Schaefer, this is the exact figure. Would you like to see our spreadsheets? Why don't you fly down and look at our books? No, I'm not going to get that. And so I have to trust the people that I'm talking to. And, when we had our first conversation, he goes, NIL is not going to be, they want him because they think he's good. They're not just going to throw money at him. And then we know that Nebraska isn't interested in being in an NIL showdown here. And so there's a real chance that the Cal is holding the largest bag. Now, does that matter? I don't know Brown enough to know what his value system is. And for some guys, it's getting the single most amount of money. For some guys, it's finding the place that they're most comfortable in. For some, it's a combination of the two. And I think Nebraska's avenue, if they were to end up with him, it's the proximity angle. It's the opportunity to play for a school that he knew of growing up. And I think he genuinely liked the people that he spent time around on Thursday. I think that's Nebraska's avenue to winning this. And yeah, there's going to be a possibility of some NIL there. And if you were Nebraska, you sure as heck should be selling, hey, you know, a local guy does well here. There's the NIL that we can offer and a rev share, but then there's the stuff that you can go make on your own. If you drive around Lincoln and Omaha, you might notice some local kids on the First National Bank billboards or all of these other things. So, I mean, Nebraska's not stupid. They know how to sell these things to local.
Hey, you need a Carson Wealth Management guy. We got yeah, I hear you. They know how to sell this to people that are from the area, and it's the right way to go about it, because you don't have to just throw money at them, but you can show them how they can make money on their own. It works the same way.
So, Schaefer, I'm glad you brought that up, because I'm curious, and maybe you know, maybe you don't, but I'm curious how much you think.
I'm sure I don't.
Nothing like an expert witness.
A hostile witness.
Jurors, you will strike what you just heard.
Schaefer, I'm curious how much Nebraska uses sort of future benefit, I guess is the way I'll put it, to being like, we all know that there is especially if you're from Nebraska, but even if you're not, if you're from Nebraska, you do well at Nebraska and stay in Nebraska, your life can be pretty good, right? Like, even well after college, even if you don't make it to the NFL or do those sorts of things. Do you know how much that gets talked about when talking to these recruits? Because if it were me, and I'm 37, not 18, so I think about things differently, at least I hope now. If somebody was telling me, hey, even if this doesn't go exactly how you want it to, if you're good here, people will take good care of you basically for the rest of your life.
I don't remember which coach it was. I wish I could remember who to attribute this to, but we were just having like a conversation after a practice one day, and we were talking about this, and he said, one of the things that's great about recruiting to a place like Nebraska is that I can show them, the former players that choose to stick around in the area, how if their football career didn't quite go how they wanted, they've still got a community that accepts and appreciates them for who they were and what they were able to give to this university. And he's like, you'd be surprised how important that is to some families, or what that means to people, that there would be a place that they could call home, that they could feel comfortable, that they have somewhere that they can always rely on. He was talking about Lincoln and Omaha in that sense. I really wish I could remember which coach that was. I think that has to be some of the conversation. What was that?
I said Mike Anderson, Terry Keneally, Lawrence Eat, Sean Buchanan.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real thing. I mean, I was just thinking the other day, like, you can walk around Lincoln or just be in various places in Lincoln, and there's Tommy Armstrong. There's some guys from, previous eras, and that's normal around here. Like, you don't have to be a star, but sometimes showing someone a place where you can have some success, you can play football, you can set yourself up for the future, and you can always have somewhere to call home. It's a valuable thing. And so not everybody's going to appreciate that pitch, but I thought that was a really interesting conversation. And all of that to say, like, I just think if you're Nebraska, you have to lean into what makes yourself different. You have to lean into the fact that, it's a unique community here. But then you have days like Saturday. And again, while I'm not the biggest proponent of the Husker games, as we saw it in its iteration on Saturday, I mean, you still got to see that alums showed up for it, that there was people excited about it, that there's just an energy about football around here that you're not going to find elsewhere in the country. Like, that's going to matter to some level of recruits. I don't know if I'm exactly answering your question, but I just think there's a unique way that Nebraska can sell itself that other places just aren't going to have.
Schaefer, let me ask you something. So, this whole due diligence versus being late to the game, or whatever that narrative is. And then Nebraska finds themselves clearly in the thick of it. How much of that is there, like, some, I don't know, there's got to be some story if this were me, there's got to be some story to tell where when you're meeting young people right where they're at, there's something clearly that they're selling, or that's not the right term. You know what I mean? That they're and the presentation that fits or that works. How much of that do you think is going to be good enough to kind of offset some of the volatility of the actual portal market and when it comes to recruiting as a whole, like this culture that guys seem to be wanting to be a part of?
Yeah, I think that you try to present who you are and what you're about as much as you can. I mean, I think one of the things that the staff does well, and they're not the first ones here in Nebraska to kind of do this, but I think it's something that was well received on Thursday. I think it's been well received by other recruits, is that they're largely pretty genuine individuals. Like what you see is largely what you get. Part of why Matt Rule wants people to come watch practices is so that there's none of this like, hey, that guy who sat in my home is a complete raving lunatic on the sidelines when he's coaching me, and I don't like this. But he's a complete, different person in a recruiting setting. And so I think it's trying to provide as much information about who you are and what you're about and learning about that other person and if they fit. I mean, I don't think Matt Rule is interested in bringing in people who aren't interested in playing football.
Yep.
If you are here, like Dylan Edwards is a great example, and I don't mean to pick on him specifically, but the running back for Kansas State was a guy that I think Nebraska had interest in, a couple different times. They obviously had an opportunity when he went into the portal from Colorado, but this is someone who has always struck me just in my conversations. He's a nice kid, but his goal is about building a brand, and it's about building the Dylan Edwards brand. And if that comes along with being a successful football player and helping his team win, great. But it's, this is a guy that was telling me about how he was looking to open a Dylan Edwards clothing store when he was in high school. And that's a really awesome goal and super ambitious. But does that fit in the culture of what you want for your team is a question that you would have to ask yourself. And so I think, Nebraska wants to find the guys who care about football first and foremost, and then, build from there. And I just think like that's a really important part of this whole thing. Like you don't want to upset the apple cart. You want to make sure that you continue to bring in people who are going to pull in the same direction because you invest this much effort and this much time in building your culture. You want to be really careful about who you let in through the front door.
That's our guy, Mike Schaefer. Good stuff as always, Schaefer. We appreciate it. And thanks for joining us a couple minutes early today.
Thanks,
all right,
Mike.
guys.